Hello. Our next speaker, Dan Mitchell, is one of those guys who does so many things and does them so well that I think he must have been cloned. No single person could do everything he does. You may have seen him on TV. He's frequently a commentator on pretty much all the networks and all the business shows. He also writes articles for all the major magazines and newspapers. He's a co-founder of the Center for Freedom and Prosperity, where you will find dozens of great videos trying to educate people about economics. But the main thing he does, as far as I'm concerned, is he writes a terrific blog called International Liberty, which I read every day. I find it informative and usually entertaining. He's got a great collection of cartoons. His most recent blog entry said he wrote this at 36,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean flying back from Europe, because he flies all over the place, all around the world, to come to places like this and speak. So please welcome one clone of the real Dan Mitchell.
All right, is someone going to put the PowerPoint presentation up, and do I have a clicker or anything like that? That would be great. Yesterday, I gave a speech in Budapest, Hungary, and I just barely made it back because my flight from Budapest to Frankfurt for my connection was delayed. And the most troubling part of it, you'll appreciate this as an anti-government crowd, I managed to run all the way down this big long terminal, get to the part of the airport that has the US flights, and I have to go through German immigration. And with the German immigration system, they have to see your inbound stamp for Europe. Okay, great, thank you. They have to see your inbound stamp. And I'm already late. It's like 5:02. My flight was supposed to have left at 5, and this bureaucrat is flipping through every single page, and I have to do enough travel that I have one of the expanded passports. And I say, knowing that this was going to be a mistake, my flight is leaving in 1 minute. Can you please hurry up? Which, of course, you don't say that to a German bureaucrat, because she puts down my passport and starts lecturing me on the rules that they have to follow. And so that just reminded me once more about the wonders of government. What I want to do is go real quickly through some very depressing information. You've had some uplifting speeches here. I'm the boring policy wonk who brings the bad news, because I'm going to explain why we face an existential threat to our country, just in terms of the rise of government spending, the increase in dependency, and the loss of freedom. And basically, it's about demographics and entitlement programs. Now, most of us, I assume, learned about a population pyramid. We have a few old people in your population, a big generation of workers, and an even bigger generation of children. That's what our country historically has looked like. And when you had a population pyramid, a modest-sized welfare state might be a mistake, but it's mathematically feasible. But here's the problem. If you think about that pyramid, we're living longer, so the top of the pyramid's going like this. And by the way, every year I get more gray hair, so I like that idea that we're living longer. But we're also having fewer children, so the bottom of the pyramid is going like this. And I'm going to show you a slide that shows our population profile. You see the pyramid for much of our nation's history, and you'll see as it goes into the future how it's turning into a cylinder. Now, what this means is, because of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Obamacare, and all the other entitlement programs, we are facing a very grim long-run future. Here's a chart showing major countries of the world and how many old people they have versus how many workers they have. And you can see the U.S. is actually in better shape than most of the other major economies. Most of the other economies of the world are going to have one worker per retire, or one for every two. Well, we're going to have two for every three. So we're a little bit better shape in terms of the ratio of workers to old people, but nonetheless, Politicians in the 1930s and 1960s created a massive welfare transfer entitlement state, and it did not reflect and is not adapted to the changing demographics of the country, just in terms of the population profile. Here's a chart that shows, it's from the OECD and international bureaucracy in Paris. It shows little white bars, little white diamonds, what the old age dependency ratio was in 1975. The blue bars are for 2015, and then the black diamonds at the top is where the age dependency ratio is going to be in 2050. In other words, the fiscal crisis that we already saw happen in Greece because of demographic change, it's going to happen in many, many other countries. Not all countries. Places like Switzerland and Australia have private social security systems. They're in much stronger long-run shape. Even Sweden has partially privatized its social security system. Other countries have made similar reforms to other entitlements. But for the most part, the Western world is in very, very difficult shape in the case of Italy, probably 2 years from now, but in the case of other countries like the US, probably 20 years from now. It's basically a function of the taxpayer-dependent ratio. In the United States, that's overwhelmingly driven by the healthcare programs such as Medicaid, Obamacare, and so on and so forth. Yes, Social Security adds a couple of percentage points of GDP to the government spending burden over the next 15 to 20 years, but it's really a function of the healthcare entitlements. And look at this projection from the Bank for International Settlements in Switzerland. U.S. debt left on autopilot will go up to, that's the red line, that's the autopilot projection, more than 400% of GDP. Here's a chart from the OECD looking at the amount of fiscal consolidation that would be needed to simply stabilize debt levels. In other words, you don't want to have a nice tall blue bar on the right side of that chart. The U.S. is one of the worst countries. Greece, Japan, they're some of the other worst countries, but we're there as well. Why? Because we had such a big baby boom generation, and that wasn't replicated in subsequent generations. And here's a chart from the International Monetary Fund. It basically shows the increase in age-related spending on the vertical axis, and it shows the amount of fiscal consolidation needed on the horizontal axis. You don't want to be in the top right quadrant. That's, it's a very complicated looking chart, but the top right quadrant is the bad place to be. And if you walk up closely and you see it, you might not be able to see it from the back. The U.S. is in the top right quadrant. In other words, we have a built-in crisis. It's like a slow-motion train wreck. It's like we know the Titanic's going to hit the iceberg. We're buying tickets and we're getting on the boat. That's the situation that we're in now. Why? Because politicians don't like addressing problems until the crisis actually occurs. In some sense, we have a race against time. If we don't do anything, we are guaranteed that our children and grandchildren are going to have the same kind of crisis they had in Greece. And guess what? There's no IMF that can bail out the U.S. You can bail out Greece because it's a fly speck in terms of the global economy. You might even be able to bail out Italy, although I think that's going to cause major damage in Europe in the next couple of years when that crisis happens. There's no way you can bail out the United States because we're the backstop for bailing out the other countries. In some sense, this Chuck Assay cartoon, Speck mentioned I like to find clever cartoons and put them on my website. Well, this one I think is clever in a very depressing and accurate way because in effect it shows what politicians have been doing to our country. Now, let me go ahead and just say a few closing comments. Can you raise taxes? Can that solve the problem? You'll certainly hear that from a lot of people in Washington, but I want to show you some evidence from Europe. If you go back to the mid-1960s in Europe, the tax burden was only about 29% of GDP in Europe. And at the time, if you look on the right side, government debt was 45% of GDP. And the European politicians said, oh, we need more taxes so we can reduce debt. We can balance our budgets. And so what do? Well, you can see the light blue bar. They increased their tax burden by 10 percentage points of GDP, mostly by adopting the value-added tax, this horrible hidden form of national sales tax. So what happened to government debt in Europe?
Croc TV.